If you like our work, you like our talk, and you love film, you can keep us caffeinated at buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos. That's buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos, or scroll down to the link on our Apple Podcast page on the podcast app. Many thanks to Ryan Parker and others for exploring these inner depths with us tonight. And tonight the question is, what happens when a scientist begins to experiment on himself using a sensory deprivation tank in conjunction with psychedelic drugs?
I think therein lies the problem with the film that we're talking about, is that the speculation leads to a more inventive and creative story that doesn't deliver. I've known of Ken Russell for a number of years. Films like The Devils. I think he did Women in Love and a couple of other British-made films, but he's not somebody that was necessarily fully on my radar. I knew who he was, but it wasn't somebody I was eager to jump into. And when you do a show like this and you're piggybacking or linking from one film to another film, it can be incredibly exciting, and it can be also incredibly disappointing. Now, with someone like Chayefksy, who I had never seen until this episode, I was blown away. I was really put in a different mindset and overwhelmed. Other directors have left me kind of like, well, that was interesting. That's very pedestrian. It's very good, but this film left me very cold. There was so much opportunity and so many different ways that it could have went that it didn't explore completely what I saw the material was capable of, and it went with something very obvious and very lackluster. It was just like there was nothing really impressive about it. Now, with that being said, we're on a path that is leapfrogging one film to another film, and the film before this was Adrian Lyne's 1990 Jacob's Ladder, which is a film that I liked quite a bit. Reservations notwithstanding, certain problems with the films, including an abrupt and it seemed studio influenced ending, a cowardly move on Adrian Lyne's part, because he could have done so much more, and in fact he supposedly did. We jumped from another couple of films, but we were brought to altered states through, Gaspar Noé's Enter the Void, Terrence Malick's Tree of Life, and, it's weird where we started with this and where we've ended up. So what was it about this film that made... First of all, had you seen this film before? Had you not seen it in a long time? And what was your relationship?
Seen it in a long time.
Okay. So what was your relationship to the film?
I knew more about the guy that it's based on, loosely. And I think part of what led me to part of what made the film emerge as a response to your film, which was Jacob's Ladder, was this aspect of, and also going back to Into the Void, is the aspect of the void. The aspect of going backwards toward the beginning, the aspect of experimentation with psychedelics, coming off of Jacob's Ladder as in experiments, versus Enter the Void, which is the use of psychedelics, the personal use of psychedelics, and the death process and all that. Jacob's Ladder is experiments with psychedelics on the military and the death process. This is scientific experimentation by a scientist on himself and not the death process, but this kind of David Cronenberg meets 2001 kind of mashup. That when you hear that, or when I hear it, when I hear myself say David Cronenberg meets 2001, that sounds very, very interesting to me.
Yeah, does to me too.
Yeah,
There is a problem with that, though. You do realize there's a major problem with that.
Well, the problem with that is that Cronenberg and Kubrick are two different fucking human beings.
Well, the problem with it is that it's not Cronenberg directing this.
Well, yeah, no.
That's the biggest problem for me.
Theoretically, it sounds great.
Yeah.
When it's this, it's like, well, what happens when? And see, this is the thing too. It's kind of like, I also was led to it by kind of the ending of the other one. Mm-hmm. I remembered on some level the ending of this one, and I said to myself, am I, and we were just talking about this before, like, are you right about your recollections in the way that you're thinking about what you're currently watching, right?
Sure.
When you're comparing. And so I'm like, there were just kind of some parallels there. The ending of Jacob's Ladder, or the kind of way that it ended, and the way that this ended, being very like pat and being a little too tidy and a little bit too, to me, kind of like, for this, love is the answer. Yeah. Was kind of, I mean, I felt it more that now that I saw it, but I had a vague recollection of that. And so it's not that I said, well, I remember vaguely these things, so now we're going to do another disappointing episode or whatever.
There's never a disappointing episode, disappointing films. We bring... No, I get what you're saying.
You know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean, but I don't want you putting anybody off.
No, I understand.
We're struggling as it is.
I understand that you guys are bored. But it's kind of like, well, is it going to be disappointing? Is it, having seen all these other things and bringing in all that other stuff, what is it? Like, and to not doubt, like to take the leap into the next film. That's to me is this process. This is an experiment too. We're experimenting on ourselves too. Last time I told you, take more drugs. While pretending to say that, or also pretending to not say that, and pretending to not give advice and blah blah blah. Right? Obviously, it's fucking tongue in cheek, but it's like, well, if psychedelics are to expand your mind, well, what happens if you listen to another type of music on your way to work instead of whatever you normally fucking listen to? Mm-hmm. How does that change the way you feel, the way you look at things, whatever? Same thing with film. If you watch a different kind of movie than what you like or what you're normally into, yeah, you may not enjoy these movies, but something might happen to where it's kind of like, hey, you know what? No, I do enjoy these movies. Or you grow, or you're double down. You're RickRamos, and you're like, no, I don't fucking like that shit. I never have. I never will. Who knows? But the idea is that we are also doing experiments on ourselves and on you, by you, the listeners, by going into these films that maybe some of you have never heard of, some of you have heard of. We have recollections, whatever. The point is, one film leads into the other. We're going back and forth. And in that is a level of surprise. And again, we're going to talk about films that normally we probably wouldn't talk about, because they're not necessarily going to come up when you're making a conscious list of the stuff that you think you want to talk about. And in that randomness, or in that kind of like surprise, there are treasures, I think. So having said that, there are the vaults, the fucking Geraldo did that show where he went to fucking look for Al Capone's vault or whatever the fuck it was, and there was nothing inside. Is there nothing inside this film? No. I just think that the film doesn't have the treasures that it could have potentially had it been what Cronenberg meets fucking 2001, which is an impossible mixture. But on whatever level it did try. And with a Paddy Chayefksy script, there's a lot of fucking potential there.
Yeah. I mean, Chayefsky, when I saw Chayefsky, I was like, okay, I was interested. I'm very familiar with Chayefsky's studio television work during the 1950s and 60s, during that era, that Sidney Lumet era of Playhouse television, Route 66, whatever those shows were back in the early days when TV was live and television was searching for a way to really produce itself and create these incredible images. It's very sad that we don't have that any longer, with the exception of Saturday Night Live, which is really an embarrassment of itself in comparison to what it once was. But we don't have that. We don't have those. The Iceman Cometh or 12 Angry Men or the Oxbow Incident produced for television in the way that the 1950s and the early 60s did. The point being, that's a world that Chayefsky came from and would go into feature films later with Lumet again, with Network, and then I think The Hospital he did with George C. Scott. I can't remember who directed that, but Chayefsky was this writer of I think a unique type of brilliance where there was an examination of real social issues, real problems that exist in society that either get swept under the rug or get treated with very facile attention and understanding. This film, I think, is a better script. It's probably a better script than what is achieved on the screen, because what is achieved on the screen, and I've always said this, you have to watch a film in the context of the times in which it is made, but there are films from this era. This film is what, 1981? Something like that? 1980?
80, 81, something 80, like that,
81.
Yeah.
I mean, around the same time, we still had you had 2001, 68, 69, 67, 68. Yeah. You had Star Wars in 76. You had Blade Runner, which was either being produced at that time. Images that stay with you and connect with you. You and I saw 2001 together for my first time. We saw it together. I think it was the Cinerama Dome, correct?
Yeah. No.
It was either the Cinerama Dome or it was the Egyptian. I can't remember which one I saw it at.
I think it was at the Egyptian.
I don't know. I think Apocalypse was the Egyptian and the Cinerama Dome was... I can't remember. But regardless of whatever.
Yeah.
Antiquated special effects that still look incredible. So yes, antiquated in the sense of happening 50, 60 years ago, and yet overpowering, compelling, the kind of thing that draws you in. Now maybe you could argue that Ken Russell was dealing with a budget that was not even, couldn't even be compared to what Kubrick was working with. But still, when you watch this movie, I found myself, two things. Number one, I wasn't drawn into the imagery of the psychedelic. except for those visions of hell. Some of those visions of hell were pretty intense and pretty incredible, and I think they were taken from silent films. I don't think he shot that. I think from a little bit of the research that I did, he pulled that out of films that might be lost, silent films from the silent film era. They definitely look like something out of Haxan or some of those other, the Murnau like imagery. Murnau would do Nosferatu and some of what Fritz Lang did with Metropolis and such. I found those moments pretty beautiful to look at.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, but so much of the psychedelic think tank. What was it? The solution tank, the isolation tank. That was very pedestrian. It was very obvious, and it looked like very cheap 2001.
Even the going back to the prehistoric ape-like man.
Yeah.
Whatever kind of hominid. That became kind of silly.
It did. It was just like I couldn't take the film seriously. I couldn't, and there was a lot of potential. It's like because what it is basically is a Jekyll and Hyde story to a degree. The problem is
it's a mad scientist.
It's a mad scientist. You don't really understand. For as tension filled and as tension filled as those scenes are, there's no immediate danger to them. And then you don't understand what that really does to the character. Now, if I were gonna, the film that this makes me want to go back to, and this would be my film if I were, see, you're always right about every fucking thing. I hate that about you, but you're always right about this kind of shit. The discussion of it.
Well, you're right about that.
Yeah. The discussion of it leads you into a film that I think is better done.
No, I mean, sometimes I fucking didn't. I let us into this, and I mean that. That's not better necessarily, but it's somewhere.
Well, let me ask you.
Someone by surprise.
I haven't seen this film in a long time. I haven't seen this film in 15, 20 years. But the film that I'm thinking of to match with this sidesteps the drugs and goes right into the science fiction aspect of it, which is David Cronenberg's remake of The Fly.
Well, I told you I was fucking curious, and I said, well, there's something that maybe it's a little bit obvious, but at the same time, it is obvious.
It is obvious,
but it's also it's also there. You think, okay, yeah, that's obvious, but like every fucking movie has like 5 avenues, every film is a tree of life in itself that can lead you into other fucking. There are themes, there are images, some of the hellscape stuff reminded me of Jacob's Ladder also, and there are plenty of places that you can go. The Fly is, you can say it's a logical kind of conclusion to this. So absolutely, it's one of those options.
It is,
and when you're dealing with something that's related to bodily horror and mad scientists, it's like, well, yeah, David Cronenberg is going to come up. The psychedelic aspect. Do you know about this guy? Do you know about John C. Lilly?
Only after reading about this movie.
John C. Lilly is an extremely interesting, or was an extremely interesting person.
But wait a minute, before you go into that, it might be a good idea to give a breakdown of the film itself.
Sure.
And then we'll go into John C. Lilly.
Sure.
So why don't you take us on that path?
So the breakdown is basically the question that I asked in the beginning. What happens when a neuroscientist begins to experiment? He's interested in consciousness, this character, just like the actual person. who was a neuroscientist. So he starts doing these experiments in a sensory deprivation isolation tank. And then when I go into more about John C. Lilly, I'll tell you what it is. Just accept that it's an isolation tank for now. In that tank, he's able to reach these interesting and different states of consciousness. So he's like, I want to keep pushing this further and further and further. Then he goes to Mexico and he gets this psychoactive plant. I think in the film it's from a cactus. So it's like a peyote, whatever. And he takes it. And so then he gets the idea to use that compound in conjunction with the isolation tank. And he believes that he's not only achieving another state of these different states of consciousness, but when he's interacting with the tribe, they basically describe a kind of time travel experience. So in Into the Void, it's a time travel experience that is basically after you die, you're going through time back to your own birth and beyond. So it's this DMT. We've been talking about this for the last couple of episodes. A life review. In Tree of Life, it's going back in time, but as a form of memory. And then the character is able to somehow go forward into meeting the people from his past, his family, his dead relatives, his loved ones, and they reunite on the beach in a way that doesn't sound like some kind of fucking like commercial for impotence or something like that most of those beach scenes remind me of, or it's some kind of like medicine or some whatever. Maybe that's just how my mind works. I don't know. Or Valtrex or whatever these pills are for.
Yeah.
It can sound cheesy, but it actually isn't cheesy. Whereas some of these other endings are cheesy, including the one we're talking about now, and we'll get to that. So in this process of talking to these Native Americans, and the person says, you'll go back to the void. He tells them that. So in the psychedelic, there is going back to the beginnings, potentially. So what starts to happen to him is he's taking more and more of this compound. He's in the isolation tank for longer periods of time. He somehow has this breakthrough where he is able, through his consciousness, to start to change his physiological structure. So he basically starts to devolve into an earlier form of human. And so his colleagues don't believe him. They do x-rays. They're doing like all this ultrasound type shit to figure out like what is he, because he emerged from the tank with blood all over his mouth, and like, well, he bit his tongue, he bit his lip, whatever. No, he's like, I'm changing. And he keeps going through that until he reaches these different like hominid stages, till he ultimately goes to, in his travel to the void, he gets to like cellular level, atomic level, subatomic level. And then what are the repercussions of that? That's what this movie is about. So someone's listening right now and saying, well, that's pretty fucking far-fetched. And
maybe.
Well, maybe, but I mean, so is the Great Train Robbery, where you're like, well, the fucking train's gonna jump out of the screen and what the fuck, blah blah blah, right? So the actual guy, makes this film look like a walk on the beach with Valtrex. Now I want to look at what Valtrex is for.
That's where it takes you.
He was to fucking either impotence or herpes or something. He was a neuroscientist who was interested in consciousness. So he invents this isolation tank in the 50s. And Joe Rogan talked about this. Mm-hmm. It's a flotation thing. You float in the dark, in salt water that's warm to the temperature of the human body, right?
Yeah. So
you're floating, and you have no sensation. You can't. There's nothing. And because of the water, the temperature of the water, and because you're floating, you don't feel your body. I've never done this, but I've wanted to do it, and I haven't done it yet. And so you lose a sensation of where are you in space. And so that all that is left is a sensation of just consciousness, because you're floating. So he starts doing this. He just has his mind. And then he got into dolphins. Dolphin consciousness, dolphin communication, the aspect of like them being in the water. And he noted that dolphin brains were highly developed, like ours. And then he was interested in interspecies communication with dolphins. So he was curious as to the way that they communicate, and he was trying to figure out a way to bridge that gap. And ultimately, because of the complexity of the way that dolphins communicate with one another, he just settled on, which makes an interesting sense in terms of the American aspect of it, is that he's like, all right, I'm going to teach the dolphin English. So he starts this program. This was seen as a model for potential future communication with extraterrestrials. So NASA was interested. SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, Carl Sagan. I don't know if you've seen Contact, that film, or if you read the book.
No. I'm familiar with it, but I haven't seen or read the book.
Okay, well, this character, Jodie Foster's character, is interested in aliens, and they're sending out like sound signals into space, hoping to get something back. Mm-hmm. That's what it is. So he's doing that with dolphins, but they're doing English. So the dolphin is trying to, through its blowhole, to reproduce like English sounds. Okay, so that starts to get out there, as in weird, when one of his research assistants begins masturbating a pubescent male dolphin. So Peter, no pun intended, is horny all the time because he's a teenager and he's not focusing. And so he's like bumping this woman, and he's very interested in her anatomy or whatever. And so then she described it as the kind of like itch to just, okay, let's just get this out of the way so we can keep working. So obviously that runs into ethical issues and etc. So you become discredited when that happens. He also was interested in psychedelics. So he started to take psychedelics in the tank. like this character. Then he started injecting dolphins with LSD. That kind of went on a dead end because he didn't notice. He noticed certain aspects, but he didn't see him like super tripping balls, any of that shit.
Yeah.
So he gets involved with Timothy Leary and all the psychedelic people. Then, at a certain point in the 60s, LSD becomes illegal, whatever. So he starts taking ketamine, this anesthetic that was used in Vietnam, going back to Jacob's Ladder. And it's an anesthetic that also has like out of body kind of experiences. So he's using that in the tank and injecting himself like every hour. And according to him, he comes into contact with these entities that he calls ECHO, the Earth Coincidence Control Office, who themselves, these entities of his mind, start to become concerned about his use of drugs. They're like, maybe you should slow down. The result of his drug use itself is telling him like, hey. And he writes, he wrote all these different books. And The Scientist, Center of the Cyclone. And in these books, he talks about hyperspace and going back in time to these different like atomic levels of existence, his own consciousness that branch out to kind of Tree of Life, Into the Void, Jacob's Ladder, to a certain point Solaris, in terms of like, you know, the idea of like, what is your reality?
Sure.
These analogs. So the themes that we've been dealing with have gotten us here are themes that he himself dealt with, are these aspects of memory, consciousness, childhood, one's origins. And these are all things that happen on the trip. You know, sex, the universe, God, connectedness, origins of life itself, fetal, cellular, all that. They've gotten us here. And it is strange that psychedelics deal with this kind of like 2001 kind of like the origin. They take you out, you know, the astronaut goes outward and he looks so far out that when he sees the earth, he or she sees the earth, they see the illusion of separateness, and then they're able to see this connectivity. They see the other as the self, whereas the psychonaut goes so far inside that they're able to see ultimately the other. And through the other, and through going the opposite of the astronaut, they see the other as themselves, which is ultimately what happens in the end of this film, which is the mad scientist has gone through these stages of his de-evolution, which in his mind is an evolution of consciousness, but it has all these, like, I mean, these are these effects that it has on his body. This Dr. Faust, Dr. Frankenstein, sci-fi. The message is we create our own horrors in the blind pursuit of our obsessions. But then it offers this love is the answer resolution that does what Jacob's Ladder does, which is cheesy. And I think there could have been other ways to achieve kind of this idea of like, well, ultimately, if death is the ultimate altered state, then the penultimate state maybe not the penultimate, but maybe at one level of a state below that is love, where you're forced to confront the other and to merge with that person, so that now there's some kind of so-called mystical thing where it's like, well, this person is a part of myself. I am a part of this person. We are now ourselves, but we're also this other thing. To be able to do that, and I don't know what other films maybe you can think of that have that kind of theme where it works. This one, it doesn't go that deeply. All it is this person is having at the end of the film this transformation, and then he touches his loved one, his wife, who he's having these issues with because he's all about his work, his experiments. Now she's transforming into this radiant, radioactive looking thing. And then in the end, she's like, fight it, come on, blah, 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 whatever. And then they embrace, and then they're brought back to their normal, like, human state. It's kind of, okay, I get it. But, for example, Genesis Peorage, who I think I referenced briefly in one of the other episodes, their music was in Into the Void, a brief bit, was into psychedelics, was into ketamine, was into occultism, was into music, was into all this shit, and had this Pandrogyny project with their loved one, the love of his life, Lady Jane, where they started to change their bodies to resemble one another. Literally, they did plastic surgery so they would resemble one another, because their love as this project, as this creative project, was so powerful to them that they said, we're going to do this. And Genesis Peorage talked about taking ketamine and how ketamine led them into this realm of like androgyny, and non-binary, like breaking out of just this either or dichotomy. That to me is much more interesting in terms of how extreme someone is willing to go in terms of their consciousness, in terms of the way they live their life, than, we're gonna hug at the end of this film, or at best we're gonna embrace at the end of this film, and it's gonna save me. So John C. Lilly's life is stranger than fiction. This film is strange fiction, but with an ending that just doesn't cut it, because it doesn't provide something deep enough to. Did you ever see that movie Wolf?
Yeah. Jack Nicholson and Michelle Pfeiffer.
Michelle Pfeiffer. Okay, so spoiler fucking alert for that. In the end, and I'm not saying that that's not cheesy, but in the end, she's able to transform to match his energy. And they are together able to become this wolf pair, right? For the world of that movie, it makes sense. And it is a happy ending, but it makes sense. In the world of this film, for him to go so far out, to the point that his physical form is going to be ultimately destroyed by his own um, extreme measures, his own extreme experimentation. And not only himself, but now his wife, because she touches him or whatever. And it's like, now whatever's happening to him is happening to her. And they have this like radioactive shape. For her to say, fight it at the end of the film, and he fights it, and then they have that embrace, and then it's the end of the film, and we're, oh my God, like, he was able to conquer at the end of the film through his love for her. It just doesn't cut it.
Well, it doesn't cut it, but it's also like the rest of the film doesn't. By the time you get to the obvious ending, the cheesy obvious ending, the studio idea.
I don't even think that it's necessarily an obvious ending, because the obvious ending is for him to be destroyed. So I just don't
the
think
artistic ending is for him to be destroyed. What I'm talking about, the obvious ending as far as the studio is concerned, in wanting to send an audience out feeling good about humanity and knowing that good wins over evil. That's what I'm talking about in the obvious ending. I'm talking about the Sid Sheinberg Love Will Conquer All ending in Brazil. What I'm talking about is the studios need to maximize comfort in an audience. Now you're talking about the logical ending for this film, which is, of course, he dies, that this thing overwhelms him and it takes him. But even if they had done that, I think that this film fucks it up on the path to get there. So an artistically satisfying ending would not save this film, because I never got the feeling that I understood not understood the character. I never felt like there was really the reality of what was at stake versus what was put on screen didn't match. So you couldn't sell out to this film, or at least I couldn't. And it's interesting because I went back and I read some of the reviews. Roger Ebert gave this like 3.5 stars, and he was talking about the brilliance of it, and I just didn't see it. I didn't. In part because it's a dated film, but also I just didn't feel like any of the actors were given. They were either underplaying it or overplaying. Like the physician.
William Hurt is the main guy.
What's that? William Hurt is the main guy. Yep. William Hurt gives one of his typical William Hurt performances, which is a good performance. He's a good actor. I always liked William Hurt. He was one of the best things about the Billy Bob Thornton Amazon series, Goliath. He could play sensitive and caring. And at the same time, he could play cruel and foreboding. He could go a number of different ways with the look that he brought to it. I believe the character that he's portraying, as far as the curiosity of wanting to know about the regression of the mind, the de-evolution, what that isolation chamber, the experience that it provides him in understanding the base soul. I believe his performance in that respect. What is a problem is there's no true discussion of what that's doing to him. Everything is amped up and frantic. Blair Brown is given nothing to work with. The wife, she's given nothing to work with except to be the loving, put-upon wife. Bob Balaban plays his usual curious but ineffectual assistant. And I like Bob Balaban. I think he's good in a lot of stuff that I've seen him in. But it's like, wow. And Charles Hayde, who you would later see on a television show called Hill Street Blues as one of the cops, ridiculously overplayed, ridiculously over, too angry in the scenes, yelling, shouting. It just didn't seem natural to me. And so a lot of this film, I mean, this film is a high wire act, and it's trying to keep your attention without turning you off, and it just doesn't do it. It's in a sad way. I think it's kind of an embarrassment, because I think the material is there to do something with someone like a Cronenberg. You can go to the dark places of the psyche to understand what this would be doing. He did it in The Fly. Videodrome, exactly. Well, he also has James Wood playing the creepiest James Woods character ever. So there's that aspect.
Yeah, but
An amped up James Woods.
If you have, pretend it's James Woods doing this. Pretend you have James Woods as a neuroscientist.
James Woods would have been much better in this role. There's a creepiness to him that he would go into that world. There's a goodness, but also it's weird. James Woods has a goodness and a scumbag quality all at the same time that is often overshadowed by the scumbag. Maybe it's his real life encroaching on the performance, but I don't know. But I love James Woods.
Well, to me already, I'm thinking of like, look, if you have the same ending, but you have James Woods,
yeah.
And you have the embrace, and then something at the end tells you, this is not the end. This is not the end of this.
Yeah.
This is going to happen again. This is just, he was able to come back from the brink,
mm-hmm.
and he's placating her somehow. Now they're both going to be destroyed. We just don't see it. It's the end of Thriller.
Yeah.
Which is more obvious, which is, he looks right at you, and you're just like, oh, fuck.
Mm-hmm. And then you hear Vincent Price cackling in the distance, which
right.
much better movie. I gotta say, Landis, Michael Jackson, and Vincent Price making a much better version of this.
Right, but it's you can have the same fucking ending and a different kind of tone. This tone was just kind of okay. But yeah, James Woods would have, I think, given it that tone of like, no, this is not the last time that they are at this crossroads.
Yeah.
But what is it that Cronenberg, we know what he brings to it, but what is it about that sets him apart in terms of this type of material? How does he do it?
Well, I think Cronenberg is fearless. I think Cronenberg goes into it. With a deep sense of cynicism, of humanity. Where Ken Russell, if you base it on this film, Women in Love, The Devils, and then later a film he would do called Whore with Teresa Randall. And I'm speculating based on what I've read about him. There's a contempt for humanity. And that's a very big difference between Cronenberg's cynicism versus Ken Russell's contempt. I don't see a humanistic approach to this material with Ken Russell in what I would see with Cronenberg. Cronenberg's going to look at it honestly. I think he's going to go more into the idea of what human beings bring to a different situation, that curiosity, that fascination, that greed for knowledge, and the level in which someone is willing to sacrifice themselves without knowing that they're sacrificing themselves. That's always the hallmark of a mad scientist story, is that there's so much desire to do a thing. As Jeff Goldblum says in Jurassic Park, there's such an eagerness to do a thing before even asking, should it be done?
Should you do it? Yeah.
Should you do it? I know
Yeah.
I fucked up the
Going
quote,
back
but
to
that's the idea of it.
right, and going back to Goldblum and The Fly.
Yeah, exactly. And I just don't see that in this film. I see, number one, because the trips aren't deep enough. He doesn't take you deep enough into what the psychedelic experience is that would make you want to take that trip with him. Maybe that's the central problem with the film, is that it's not created, the trips are not reproduced so interestingly, such that you would want to go on those trips. At least I didn't want to, and I think he could have solved that problem. And this is gonna sound woke, but it's not. This is not woke. This is.
And also like people, how are we using fucking woke? Like,
Well,
and this is a side rant.
Well,
but
this is the contempt that I have for the appropriation of that kind of shit. You know, where it's like where it becomes something different from what I originally. I like the idea of woke in theory. I like the idea of being
aware of racism,
aware of the realities of life, rather than in that Matrix-like red pill or blue pill fucking days of I don't want to know. I'd rather just be in the dark about it.
Yes.
That's the way I view the original, instead of this jumping on a social justice bandwagon bullshit that we see, and in some cases is right. But what I mean when I say this is going to sound like some woke shit, and I'm a proponent of always watching a film in the times in which it was made. But if you had gone more into the cultural importance of what the psychedelic drugs were for the Indians in this film, I think that would have been a pathway into understanding someone's passion for the experience. I never got that. What this was your typical look at native cultures as mysterious and
horrific
primitive, to one degree. Yeah. Primitive, horrific, but also spiritually enlightened to the degree that we as Americans and white people, as portrayed in this movie, are incapable of. Because we're so far away from nature. We're so far away from the natural order and what, yeah.
But if we just take this item that they have, we can use it we can synthesize this drug and use it in a better way, with Western science, and we can move forward with our evolution as humans into the past.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
But I think that's what would have made for a better film. A true depiction of what the natives considered the importance of this drug. Why would they do it? What is the importance of a sweat lodge? What does it honestly, and that always bugs the shit out of me, where it's some white person or even, someone like myself who doesn't, there's the reconnection to the original religions or the spiritual. It's always undertaken through this world without a true understanding of what that world is. And this is just another example of that. I think if even in 1980, especially in 1980, if they had enough sense to go into what made it important to the natives, you would have had a much better understanding of why the doctor character, the hurt character, would want to undergo such an experience.
And maybe why it would be so, to show that he's truly misusing it beyond just like, oh, this doctor's crazy.
Well, yeah.
I've had the opportunity to do the temescal, the sweat lodges, with legitimate shamans, and there's a reason why these people are guides. This isn't like, don't do this, don't try this. This is a don't try this at home type of shit. And this character in this film is, I'm going to try this at home.
Don't do that. I'm going to do it. Just like,
yeah.
It's like a fucking 5-year-old. Fucking people.
And there are certain reasons why I've done psychedelics, but at the same time, for example, cacao, which is the basis of chocolate. I've done a cacao ceremony, but I've also just made in Guatemala, like, we made chocolate from cacao, from the tree.
Yeah.
And there's a process of, you get it out of the pod, and then you roast it, and it has, the beans or the seeds or whatever, and then you grind, and then it's not psychedelic, but it's psychoactive in that it has all these different, as all this shit does. It has all these different components that affect, like, serotonin and all this shit in your brain, right? I ate a large amount of cacao, chocolate, and the night that I ate that, and I wasn't doing it I just ate it because I'm a fucking pig. I didn't eat it because I was trying to achieve anything. I just didn't stop. I just fucking ate the whole thing because I like dark bitter chocolate. And so I ate all this shit, and Leslie was like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And I was like, "This shit is good. Like, don't judge me. I'm eating it all."
Look away.
And that night, or not, I don't care. And that night, I dreamt. I had these weird lucid type dreams, but I wasn't able to control them. But I was aware that I was dreaming, and I dreamt of a fucking fetus floating in a cacao pod, and the fetus was me. And I remember asking in the dream if I was gonna die. And I got an answer, and the answer was like, yes, but not now. And it was like, and then I went to go pee, and I still felt like I was like half in a dream. I don't know what that means. All I know is that in certain settings with certain compounds, they're going to evoke certain images. And a lot of times those images, I mean, these are the things that human beings, these are these main archetypal or whatever symbolic images. Look at all the controversy. The controversies that we have, they're always around where people fuck, where they eat, and where they shit. Whether it's the lunch counter, the bathroom, the bedroom. And all these social things about whether it's issues about trans rights and what's going to happen. Oh, everyone freaks out about these basic human things: where you shit, where you eat, where you sleep.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be. We have such a concern for these things, whether you're thinking about it in terms of like Freudian shit, and all this is like, you can say, well, this is passé because this is fucking like so long ago, like this is not in vogue in psychology. But this shit is still out there. Whether you're thinking about it in terms of Jungian psychology and the archetypes and all that, or whether you're thinking about it in terms of Freudian, like, well, it makes sense that why do you, when you're dying, are you thinking about your childhood? Why, or why in Tree of Life is he thinking about his childhood? Or why when you're tripping on whatever, or you fucking ate too much cacao and you're dreaming that you're a fetus in a fucking pod the size of a Nerf football. This is just where we end up on this trip, this film trip. But at the end of the day, I think it's all like, it's the connectivity theme that we run through. From Fallen Angels, Wings of Desire, O Azar Baltazar, Her, Eo, Tree of Life, Solaris, Tideline, Enter the Void, Jacob's Ladder, Altered States. Obviously, this thing is a winding fucking road. And we find the themes that we want to look at. But along that long and winding Beatles road, there are like missteps. There are steps and there are missteps, and maybe we're going to Cronenberg, where it's like, okay, this is something that achieves that, versus this one that we're talking about now, Altered States, it doesn't hit the mark the same way. But this is the journey. This is this thing of ours that we've chosen to play with, and to see what comes out of it. The obsession, the idea of memory, the idea of all these films are about, and every story is about that. It's about someone's place in the world and how that person interfaces with everyone else in the world and with the world. And sometimes within those stories, they think about how they interface with the world. Sometimes the characters obviously don't. They just, Tom Cruise needs to go prevent the terrorists from detonating the bomb. So that's, again, yeah. Sometimes it's not, it's not about the bomb.
No.
In a sense, it's kind of like cinema itself is a MacGuffin, because it's like the movie, it's not even about the movie. The movie is an excuse to engage in these themes. We get caught in the MacGuffin of the film, which is beautiful. That's the amazing thing, right?
Yeah.
And we talk about the film, and we talk about all these different films, but at the end of the day, no matter what it is, you're always going to come back to that fucking, it may not be you as a fetus floating in a fucking cacao pod, but it's going to be these same themes that are going to be repeated in every fucking story. You turn on the fucking Spotify or the radio or whatever, and you're going to hear a song about love. It's basic shit, but it's beyond basic shit. It's elemental shit, but it's beyond elemental shit. And how, the question is, well, how is it put together? Well, what is this MacGuffin? The details. In this particular episode, the MacGuffin, which is the film that we watched, it just kind of, sometimes it's like, if you buy what I'm saying, maybe someone like you is like, okay, yeah, sure, I understand this concept that you're playing with, that the film is a MacGuffin, but I want to forget that the film is a MacGuffin, and I want to believe that the film really matters and not just look at these themes. I want to know the story. I want to know the characters. I want to get lost. Sometimes, maybe for me, it's like, no, I want to be very much aware that I'm walking in to see something that's completely artificial, but I want to see how artificial they can make it to their own style. How trippy is the MacGuffin? How beautiful, how haunting, how horrible, how ugly, how sexual, how funny, or whatever is this MacGuffin. This one, the Altered States MacGuffin film, is kind of a mixed bag. It has some. So for example, I'm rambling and ranting, but
No, it's perfect. I mean, it's the appropriate movie to do it with, though.
the trip images from when he's having sex with this woman when they first meet,
Mm-hmm.
those to me were more powerful than all the other trips, the trip imagery. When she's asking him, she's like, oh, "Who are you having sex with?" And it gets into all this religious stuff, and I think that's the segment where you see like a crucified Christ, right?
Yeah.
That to me, for some reason, and now we're back in the bedroom. Maybe he would have had, if he were on the toilet, maybe he would have had like a better trip imagery. Because the bedroom was like, to me, the for some reason more believable and more powerful, in that it was also unlocked. Some of that stuff is unlocked while he's having sex, versus in that tank, which is a kind of the complete opposite, because occultists and esoteric practitioners of these different tantric elements or whatever, or whether it's sex magic spelled with a K as in occultism, to differentiate from the illusionist pulling a rabbit out of a hat. These people believe that sexual energy and the moment of orgasm is the releasing of like an incredible amount of power. And then if you mix that with certain mental imagery, you can send out intentional power out that can achieve something. Whether you believe in that or not. Or you can believe in that when you're in that moment with someone, that's the closest that you can be to another person, is when you're in the sexual act with them and you transcend yourself, and that other person transcends themselves, and now you're in this elemental, animalistic, but also potentially spiritual state, right? Which is very, very focused on being embodied, having your physical, you're in the moment, you're in your body. How much more in the body can you be than when you're having sex? Versus the idea of being in a state where you're floating in an isolation tank, where you have no sensation of your body and all that's left is your consciousness. And now you're tripping with that. And for whatever reason in this film, I think that the hallucinations, the visions that he has when he's fully embodied having sex, are more powerful than the ones when he's disembodied. That to me is kind of like you would think that it would be the other way around, because that was his pursuit, was consciousness beyond the body. But in the end, it all just comes back to his physical form, including in the end when he has to embrace the woman to return to himself. So what does all that bullshit mean? I just mean that it's kind of, I guess it makes sense when I think of it that it would be that way, but I don't think that the film intends for it to be that way. I mean, this is how I'm interpreting it, that to me, those particular visions just seem more powerful, the sex visions, over the regular disembodied visions.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, had Ken Russell and had the film gone in more of the direction of pursuing, I mean, it's not, John Lilly wasn't based on that, but the embodied aspect and a focus on the body and a focus on the connection with another body, then would make sense for an ending that would involve the character being saved by a connection with another body. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think there's an aspect.
It doesn't do that though.
Well, I think and you run into this with films that attempt something different, that try to go into try to examine this type of a world. I think every once in a while you get a film that doesn't understand its story, and I think that's what the problem is here. There's not a true understanding of the hallucinogen of what that does to you. I mean, I think there's a better understanding of it listening to Bill Hicks than anything that is achieved on this that is achieved in this movie. When Hicks talked about the experiencing existence as a communal whole and how drugs help you do that, I understood Hicks's somewhat idealistic approach to the material a hell of a lot better than anything that Paddy Chayefksy and Ken Russell are able to put on screen. And that's why I think, it's ultimately perhaps people who look at psychedelics and drugs, for that matter, from an outsider's point of view without truly understanding what the psychedelics, from everybody that I've ever spoken to who's used and has, gone on an acid or a mushroom or peyote trip, the constant thing that I hear is opening up that third eye and experiencing the world with a different vision, from a different angle, from a different understanding of what the species is, and to a degree what we are capable of. In a weird way, I look at this film and I see nothing but a square's interpretation of a very real scientific and psychological and spiritual experience. So I think these are the wrong guys for it.
I think because it turns the quest for discovery of inner spaces, even though John C. Lilly's quest went into some areas that were, wacky. Mm-hmm. Is one way of this, but also obviously he wasn't the only one like testing on animals for anything.
Yeah.
But that in conjunction with animal testing already is a certain thing, and then now you add in, and she wasn't like quiet about it, she was just matter of fact about it, and it wasn't on her part. Based on my understanding of it, is this research assistant was not. So-called like getting off on getting the dolphin off.
Yeah.
It was, to her, it was just kind of like, well, let's get this out of the way because you're being disruptive.
Yeah.
And now, but I mean, it's not like you would do that with a person that you were trying to tutor. You know what I mean? Like, obviously she doesn't view the dolphin as she would a person, but the idea is that you're dealing with supposedly this animal. If you're dealing with these hierarchies of animal intelligence, supposedly the dolphin is at the higher end.
Sure.
So now how does that deal? What are the ethics of that, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of the intelligence, whatever, there's just all these ethical questions. But aside from that that version of the John C. Lilly journey or the John C. Lilly trip, it's kind of like, well, the John C. Lilly trip is you see interviews with him, including some where he's fucked up in the interview. It's always, you get this sense of this process of learning, this process of like going through these levels of consciousness that and feeling like he has to face these fears. At one point, in one interview, he describes that, I don't know if it was a trip or a dream, I don't remember that clearly anymore, but he felt that his penis had been removed. I think he was tripping at the time, and and obviously this is Freudian, and his wife is like, no, it's still attached, and then that in the processing of it with these higher entities, according to him, he's like, well, their answer was, no, you had this deep-seated fear of that, and so you had to face that fear so you could get beyond the fear. And now you have to go to the next level. And every level of your belief system is just something that is to be realized and transcended so you can get to the next level. And so in that sense, you can think of it as this kind of, going back to this concept of the tree of life, or a ladder, Jacob's ladder. These levels of consciousness, or the Kundalini snake, these different chakras from the bottom going up, whether it's in Jewish occultic tradition or Kabbalistic or whatever, you're going from this base up to the crown. You're ascending these different levels of consciousness. That idea, or those ideas, are not what we get in this film. What we get in this film is kind of, you can also think of it in terms of a fucking, this is a Reagan don't do drugs movie.
Yeah. You can see that.
He should have been a good scientist that is, coming up with the development of Valtrex. Whatever. Now I'm going to look up what this fucking thing is. But instead of looking into his own, it's a herpes drug. Instead of exploring consciousness and all this shit, it's like you play with fire, you get burned. This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs.
Yeah.
Any questions? It is a square movie because it turns it into a horror story. It turns it into the deal with the devil, and you get fucked at the end.
Sure.
Versus maybe just this quest that gets out of hand. The Fantasia, I think, is more what it is.
Yeah.
Mickey is trying to to solve this issue, and he overdoes it. And now Mickey Mouse is over his head as the young wizard's apprentice. And now how do you get back to that place? I think that's more along the lines of what it is. But you're right. I think it is a square's perspective of turning the drug consciousness process into a horror story. And if you're gonna do that, then do it as a fucking horror story that the way Cronenberg would do it. Obviously, not everyone should follow in Cronenberg's footsteps, but
not many people can. But I understand. Yeah. So, I mean, I look at this film, and I'm glad I saw it. But it's also the type of thing where I sit here and I wonder how it could have been done better.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a much better film here. I think we need and it's interesting in going into the watching and then the discussion where you start to see where a more nuanced filmmaker, or a filmmaker who is more, I mean, even someone like Oliver Stone. I would like to see Oliver Stone's approach to this material. Someone who
Why
is
him?
a drug, well, somebody who is a drug user and a proponent to a certain degree. Look at the images that he brought to Natural Born Killers, but it's also 15 years later with technology that could have that, you know. But I mean, from what was being achieved before then, you could see how. I think when you watch this film, the ideas are there, but it's mishandled, and the images are not enough to pull you into a story that is that has as much potential as this one. It's a disappointing experience, but it is one that I'm glad we jumped into, because it can't all, you know, cinema, like everything else, is on a spectrum. Good versus bad, success versus failure. And even with failure, you have noble failures. There's a couple of good things in this. It's just not enough to carry it over the finish line. And I don't know. I think that I would love to read Paddy Chayefsky's script to see if there was a problem with it, or if, you know, I don't remember which film critic I read, but one of them said, instead of trying to remake classics, instead of trying to remake Casablanca for like the umpteenth time, why don't you try to remake films, either bad films or films that missed the mark? If you're going to remake something, remake this. Because I think there's a potential to go into that world. If you look at what Gilliam did with Parnassus, or Gilliam did with Fear and Loathing, or if you look at some of the images created by countless other, you know, who's another one that goes into the fantasy world beautifully? Can you think of somebody who
I mean,
could,
it fantasy. It depends. Are you talking about it related to like maybe drugs, or related to an altered state of consciousness,
well,
or
I think
just a
like for
different look,
example,
or
Ridley Scott could create a world.
yeah, yeah, he
You
creates
could imagine Ridley
fantasy
Scott's,
worlds.
yeah. You know, there are directors like that. There are directors that could create these worlds that you could go into, and that would make the tripping experience exciting and
I mean,
interesting.
even if you were to take, for example, a Christopher Nolan, that would come from it
Yeah,
maybe at a different, more, you would say, more of a clinical approach.
yeah,
That maybe is closer to not the same, but I just mean maybe more of a logical, but it still fucks with you based on the timeline or based on perspective.
sure,
Something more in the realm of a Kubrick. Um, Even a Nolan approaching this, I think, would have grasped at certain aspects of the clinical, and certain also aspects of the trippy,
yeah,
aspects of the way it fucks with time, things that Nolan is good at. Um, the way that the interior alters the exterior world. Um, an Aronofsky would have been great at the self-destructive aspect of it. How did this
sure,
person fucking get to the point where, despite maybe all their intentions, they are bound to face their own destruction? Right?
I
It
think
can
so.
go. It can go a number of different ways. Even I think a Spielberg doing this would be, well, love is the answer, supposedly, but maybe a couple of side mirrors on the car shots,
Yeah,
and whatever else would get you there, and you would feel like crying at the end somehow. Um, there are different ways of reaching it, but I think for whatever reason, this one just didn't fully realize. I think probably like obviously it didn't realize what we would have wanted from it.
Yeah.
We got what we got, but it just it didn't go far enough.
I think you're right.
So before I take it for granted that this process of jumping back and forth between films, that there's something to be achieved through that. Is it because you had mentioned a different film before we started, and I think it, like I said, I think you mentioned The Cell. You hadn't seen it. I think it had been on in the background at some point. I didn't really watch it, but it's like, let's pretend that. But you also mentioned The Fly, so let's pretend that we don't do The Fly. Whatever, we'll decide what we're gonna do. But let's say we don't do that, and let's pretend we do The Cell, and let's pretend we both think that it's horrible. And then obviously we can do the game of who would have done it better, what's the better cast, blah blah. Right? Yeah. This fantasy football version of watching a movie, which is cool and it's fun. What do we gain from your perspective, if anything, or just tell me I'm full of shit, from this process of back and forth, and what does the audience gain from this kind of like, let's get lost approach to, ooh, look at that. Oh, this associates with this associates with that. This kind of one thing leading to another, one thing stumbling into another. What do we gain from this?
Well, it's the same as any other art form, whether it's music or painting or modern art, whatever. It's like, one artist influences another, and it's all a different take on somebody else's experience, or your experience and somebody else's take. I mean, jazz music evolves from bebop or big band bebop into modern. Everything goes to a different place. I mean, if you look at somebody like Miles Davis, the man didn't want to play the old shit. He did it. He was constantly evolving, and like. If you look at like directors, it's great to look at somebody's early work. Like I still hold Mean Streets and Taxi Driver dear to my heart, but I'm really interested in seeing what Killers of the Flower Moon are going to be. I'm really, and me about as well as anybody, and anybody who listens to this knows my fascination with aging artists and reaching a point of trying to understand what their art is actually about. I find that shit fascinating. I love the evolution. I love where films can go. I like knowing where where film and cinema was, and where it ultimately gets to, missteps and all. You can't watch nothing but good films, because how many of them are there? There's a number of really good films, but there's also a number of bad films with great moments that tell you a lot about the process. Is this a bad film? I mean, it's capable. It's not a good film. I don't think it's a good film. I think, but it's also important to see where where you can go wrong, where the mistakes can be made. It's like anything else in life, you follow the narrative and you see where it plays out. I'm glad I watched this film, but yeah, if you ask, is there a point to all of this? You're goddamn right. There's a point to all of this. I mean,
we know where I stand on it, but I'm just curious as to your perspective, especially since you view things so differently from the way I view them.
Yeah, yeah. But there's an importance to it. There's a, you know, you can't say that you're a true fan. If you just like watching movies, that's fine. You enjoy a good movie every once in a while, and then you go back to your life. But if movies mean something to you, and this is not putting me or you and I or this show on some pedestal of grandness. What I'm saying is, when you value a thing, you want to know as much of it. You want to know about as much of it as you can take in. It helps you understand it better. It helps you understand the art. It helps you understand the beauty, and it helps you understand the potential more than if you were to just watch a movie and then walk away from it. There's a lot more. What was the intention? Where did it fall short? Where did it exceed? What does it teach us about ourselves? There's a lot here to unpack. And I think that's the problem that Ken Russell and Paddy Chayefksy faced. They didn't unpack enough. There's so much more here. Maybe it should be remade. I don't know. But it's going to lead us to other films. I mean, I want to watch David Cronenberg's Naked Lunch. I want to read Burroughs' book again. Try to, at least this time. I want to go back to Parnassus and Zero Theorem. I want to find, what I really want to do is find foreign films that deal with this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an exploration. It's a path, and you either want to go there or you don't. I know that I do. So I find this little tennis game that we're having pretty fucking interesting and worthwhile. So that's my answer to that question. Yeah.
That's the altered state that is cinema.
That it is.
It leads us to the altered state. It changes us.
Hey, change is good. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for sticking it out with us. Thanks for your contributions and your support. This is a labor of love, but it's nice to know that you guys are willing to, throw a couple of dollars our way every once in a while. That is that means the world. So thank you for your continued support. We'll be back next week, and we're gonna go on a trip with an old friend. So we're looking forward to that. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.